Hello dear students of class 11th, we have already discussed in the last video, last lecture, the respiratory system, the first part of the respiratory system, where we discussed the various structures of the respiratory tract, upper respiratory tract, lower respiratory tract, and so far we have discussed the nose, nasal cavities, pharynx, and we have described the structure of the larynx, that is voice box, and the trachea. This is again here in the diagram, if you can see on the board, this is trachea, that's made up of the cartilaginous rings, C-shaped incomplete cartilaginous rings, and lined by the pseudostratified ciliated epithelium with mucous cells, right? This is the upper part of the trachea, that is larynx, right? Okay. Today we are going to discuss the another part of this respiratory system, that is the respiratory organs, and you know the respiratory organs are lungs. So today we are supposed to discuss the structure of the lungs first, and second how this is the bifurcation of the trachea at its lower end, and these two divisions, I mean these two branches are called as primary bronchi. We have discussed in the last lecture, these are called primary bronchi, which enter into the lungs, and this is the right bronchi which enter into the right lung, and this is the left bronchi which enter into the left lung. And how these primary bronchi divide and subdivide into many branches and finally open into the lung alveoli, we have to see all these things in our present lecture, right? So let's start from here, that is the main respiratory organ where the actual respiration occurs, where the actual gases exchange occurs, are the two spongy, elastic, soft, pinch lungs present in the thoracic cavity of the human body, right? So let's start from here. The respiratory organs in humans are, in all mammals are what? Two spongy, right? Elastic, so far as color is concerned, almost pinkish in color, pinkish lungs. So there are two lungs, elastic lungs, which have the elasticity in them because there is expansion and contraction in the lungs during the process of inspiration and expiration, right? So they must be elastic and they are pinkish in color. Now the important thing about the lungs is their location, where they are located, where these lungs are located. So far as the location is concerned, let me write here. So far as the location of the lungs is concerned, let's talk about the location. So these lungs are present in the thoracic cavity. They are located in the thoracic cavity. And you know that this thoracic cavity is in the form of a cage, right? It is guarded by the various structures anteriorly as well as posteriorly. Now so far as this thoracic cavity is concerned, anteriorly this thoracic cavity is guarded by 12 pairs of ribs. Yes, the thoracic cage is formed by the 12 pairs of ribs. There are 12 pairs of ribs on the anterior side, and all the 12 pairs of ribs are connected with a median bone in the chest. Here is a median bone in the chest, and that bone to which all the all these ribs, all the costa are connected. That bone is known as chest bone, that's known as sternum. So anteriorly this thoracic cavity is enclosed by these 12 pairs of ribs which are connected with the sternum, that is chest bone, right? So this is the anterior protection to these vital organs called lungs. 12 pairs of ribs which are connected with this sternum. Posteriorly these ribs are connected with the vertebral column, with a part of the vertebral column, the thoracic vertebrae. There are 12 thoracic vertebrae, and that's the part of the vertebral column. So let me say simply vertebral column. So this is the rib cage which is formed by these all structures. A cage, a thoracic cage, is formed by all these structures. 12 pairs of ribs anteriorly which are connected with the sternum anteriorly, and posteriorly these ribs are connected with the vertebral column, with the thoracic vertebrae of vertebral column, right? So in this way this will form a cage, thoracic cavity with space where the two lungs are present, where the two lungs, the right and the left lung, is present. Not only the lungs are protected by this thoracic cavity, this thoracic cage, rather another vital organ, you know, that is the heart, is also located in the same space, that is thoracic cavity, right? So this is what about the thoracic cavity, which is the location of these two lungs. Now, but besides the thoracic cavity which is protecting the lungs, besides the thoracic cavity, besides these ribs and the vertebral column posteriorly which is protecting these two lungs, these lungs have their own protection which protect the lungs from the external shocks. Yes, both the lungs are enclosed, right? They are enveloped by its own membranes, by some membranous structures which provide the, you know, shock absorbent protection to these lungs. And what are those membranes, what are those covers, what are those envelopes? These are called as pleura or pleural membranes. So both these lungs, in addition to the rib cage, in addition to the thoracic cavity, are protected by pleura. So this is a term, pleura or pleuri. It is the plural term because there are two lungs and both the lungs are protected by these pleuri. So there are two pleural membranes. There are two pleural membranes outside the two lungs. There are two pleural membranes outside the lungs. This is the right lung, this is the left lung, right? And both outside these both lungs, spongy lungs, there are pleural membranes. And from outside to inside we can say there is outer, this is called the outer pleura, right? And the inner one, that is known as the inner pleura or inner pleural membrane, we can say also. This one is also called the outer pleural membrane, is also known as the parietal pleural membrane, and inner is known as the visceral pleural membrane. So here from this left side there is also these two membranes which are enveloping the lungs, which are covering the lungs from the outside, right? But there is a space between the two pleural membranes, outer and inner. There is a space. This space between these two pleura is known as pleural cavity. Fine, pleural cavity. And you know that in this pleural cavity there is fluid. There is fluid inside the pleural cavity. There is a fluid, and this fluid inside the pleural cavity is known as pleural fluid, right? This is known as pleural fluid, and it must be there because it's very, very important for the sliding of these two membranes over one another during the process of inspiration and expiration, and that enables the lungs frictionless movements during the process of inspiration and expiration. During the process of inspiration and expiration, right? The process of respiration, right? These lungs need the flexibility, these lungs need the space outside, and that flexibility and that space, that accommodation is provided by these pleural membranes. And they also need a frictionless movement. For the frictionless movement of these two lungs, there is a lubricant between the two membranes. That lubricant is known as pleural fluid. By the way, this fluid is itself produced by the same membranes called outer pleura and inner pleura, right? So this is the space outside, this is a coelom outside the two lungs which is accommodating the lungs, and besides accommodating it, providing it the space, very important space, right, for the frictionless movements, for the expansion and contraction. This space is very, very important, right, because it provides a type of protection to both the lungs, protecting the lungs from the external shocks, right. So this is all about the pleura. Now there is also a space between the two lungs here. You can see this, there is an interval between this pleura and this pleura. So this interval between these two pleura, right and the left, it includes the two pleura of the two lungs. This interval between from this lung to this lung, that is right and left, this is again a very important space. This space is known as mediastinum. Mediastinum. So what is mediastinum? This is simply the interval between the two lungs, or you can say this is the interval between the two pleura of the right and the left lung, right. So here we have the medial space of the right lung, here we have the medial space of the left lung, right lung, right, and there is an interval between the two. This interval is known as mediastinum. This is very, very important space because there are many structures accommodated inside this mediastinum. For example, inside this mediastinum there is heart. Heart is present in the same space. Heart, the very important pumping organ of the body, that we will explain in the upcoming video lecture. So heart is present in the same space, I will tell you, right. So there is one more thing, that is thymus gland is also accommodated in the same area. Thymus gland, that is also located here. And the thoracic duct, that is the lymphatic duct called thoracic duct, that is also present in the same space. Thoracic duct, right. So these are many organs, these are many structures which are present, which are accommodated, which are placed in the same space, that's known as mediastinum. That is actually the interval between the two pleura, interval between the two lungs, right. Is it clear? So the first important thing that you need to understand is that there are two lungs, spongy, elastic, pink lungs in humans, and these two lungs are present in the thoracic cavity. The thoracic cavity is guarded by the 12 pairs of ribs and the sternum from the anterior side, and posteriorly these ribs are connected to the vertebral column. And second, these two lungs have their own protection in the form of pleura. There are two pleural membranes, outer and inner. Between the two there is space that's known as pleural space, pleural cavity, which contains the fluid. This pleural space, pleural cavity and fluid provide the protection to the lungs from the external shocks, and also provide the frictionless movements to the lungs during the process of inspiration and expiration. Anyways, now so far as external morphology is concerned, or you can say size of these two lungs are concerned, if you can see the diagram on the board, right lung, this one is the right lung. This right lung is larger than the left lung. Yes, there is difference in the size of the two lungs. The right lung is larger than left lung. Okay, so you have to keep in mind the right one is larger than the left lung, and that is why I tried myself to draw in a different way. This is the bigger one and this is the smaller one, right. And one more thing, in the left lung, if you see the left lung here is a cavity here in the left lung. In the left lung there is a cavity, there is a space, right, concavity rather, and this concavity in the left lung is known as cardiac notch. And this cardiac notch, that is why the cardiac refers to the heart. So in the left lung there is a concavity, there is a space. This is the space for the heart. Generally when we try to locate the one's heart, we say towards the left side, right. So this is here in the left lung, there is left lung, and in the left lung there is a space, there is a concavity which is the space provided to the heart. So heart is exactly here. In most of the cases the heart is lying towards the left, that is levo condition is there, levocardia, right. The heart is towards the left side. There are some exceptions in the so far as the position of the heart is concerned. It is sometimes towards the right, that is called dextrocardia. That is very rare condition in humans where the heart is tilted towards the right, but generally the heart is tilted, its apex is towards the left side of the left lung, right, in the concavity, that's known as cardiac notch. So cardiac notch is actually the actual space, that is the exact space where the heart is present, right. So this is one more important thing regarding the lungs. Now, so far as internal structure is concerned, so far we have discussed what are the structures that are lying outside the lungs. Thoracic cavity and pleura, and this space also, that is this mediastinum, where the different structures like heart, thoracic duct and thymus is present. Now, so far as internal structure is concerned, that is what is lying inside the two lungs. Now, here we have to concentrate again on these primary bronchi. Now, once these primary bronchi, bronchus is singular, bronchi is plural. So primary bronchi, here the trachea bifurcates into primary bronchi, right? This is the right bronchus and this is the left bronchus. Again, here is difference. The right bronchus is more in diameter than the left one. Left one is narrow in diameter than the right one, right? This is again the difference. So this right bronchi and the left bronchi enter into the two lungs. They enter into the lungs, right? Once they enter into the lungs, these primary bronchi, they divide and redivide many times. Listen again. The trachea bifurcates into two bronchi. One is right bronchus, another is left bronchus, and these two bronchus enter into the lungs. One into the right, another into the left. After they enter into the lungs, they divide and redivide many times. These primary bronchi first divide into the secondary bronchi. The primary bronchi divide into secondary bronchi, right? They divide into secondary bronchi, and secondary bronchi divide into the tertiary bronchi. Tertiary bronchi. So if we, for example, concentrate on this diagram, this is the primary bronchi, then we have the secondary bronchi, then we have the tertiary bronchi here, for example, right? So this is the first division, secondary bronchi, tertiary bronchi. Now we have to remember a very important point here. So far we have seen in the trachea and even in the primary bronchi the cartilaginous rings. These cartilaginous rings are present even in the secondary bronchi and the tertiary bronchi as well. They are not only present up to the trachea or up to the primary bronchi, they are also present in the secondary bronchi and tertiary bronchi. So what I mean, these primary bronchi, secondary bronchi and tertiary bronchi are also supported by these cartilaginous rings which were present in the trachea. Fine, go ahead. Now, finally these tertiary bronchi, they divide into smaller branches. They subdivide into smaller branches called as bronchioles. The term is bronchioles. So the tertiary bronchi finally subdivide into bronchioles. And the most important thing is these bronchioles are not having any kind of cartilaginous rings. They are without, these bronchioles are without, they are without cartilaginous rings. This is the first change here in the bronchioles. They are devoid of cartilaginous rings. They are devoid of, without, absent. Right? Bronchioles do not have the cartilage. And one more thing, their epithelium is very, very thin. If we compare that epithelium, pseudostratified epithelium with the trachea, with the primary, secondary, tertiary bronchi, the epithelium of the bronchioles is very, very thin, right? It's very, very thin. And there is less mucus secretions in the bronchioles than in the primary bronchi, tertiary bronchi, secondary bronchi or tertiary bronchi. So these are some changes which are associated with the bronchioles when we compare the bronchioles with the other bronchi, primary, secondary, tertiary. Now there is again redivision. There is division of these bronchioles into many fine branches. The bronchioles themselves divide into many branches. These bronchioles, let me write here, bronchioles onwards. These bronchioles divide into some other branches, smaller branches called as alveolar, or lobular, better to say, lobular bronchioles. They also divide into lobular bronchioles. bronchioles divided into lobular bronchioles. This is further division. And these lobular bronchioles, they also divide into terminal bronchioles. They divide into terminal bronchioles. Got it? Terminal bronchioles. And these terminal bronchioles also divide into the respiratory bronchioles. They divide into respiratory bronchioles. Fine. And these respiratory bronchioles, they open into a duct. That duct is known as arterial duct. They open into a duct-like structure, then expanded structure, that's known as arterial duct. And this arterial duct finally opens into one more expanded structure, that's known as atrium. This is another structure. This is an expanded structure. I will show you this diagram again in order to show you all these things, right? So bronchioles into lobular bronchioles into terminal bronchioles, guys, terminal bronchioles into respiratory bronchioles into some ducts called arterial ducts, and finally they open into a chamber that's known as atrium, and finally this atrium opens into the actual structures where the exchange of gases takes place. The oxygen diffuses into the blood and the carbon dioxide diffuses into the lung alveoli for the exchange, for the expiration. So the actual structures where the exchange of gases takes place, having a lot of surface area for the exchange, the structures are called alveoli, lung alveoli. So this atrium finally opens into the alveoli or alveolar sacs. Sometimes the term is used, alveolar sacs. So this is how actually the primary and secondary and tertiary bronchs divide inside the lungs. What happens inside the lungs, I am trying to make you understand. There is first bifurcation of the trachea into primary bronchi, which divide into secondary bronchi, then into tertiary bronchi, then into bronchioles, and then further division occurs in the bronchioles into lobular bronchioles, terminal bronchioles, respiratory bronchioles, arterial duct, and then atrium, and finally into the alveoli or alveolar sacs, which are the minute lungs, where the actual exchange takes place, right? Now, so if you want to understand this division further, we need to rub this diagram so that you can understand. Let me make it a bit more simple. So that you can understand, right? So we don't have a lot of space on the board so that we can keep all the diagrams intact. So let's go ahead. So let me say, for example, this is the primary bronchi, which divide into secondary bronchi, right? And this one is dividing into tertiary bronchi. Let's say this is primary bronchi, this is secondary bronchi, and this one is tertiary bronchi. Fine. And then we have the smaller branches. Let's say these are the smaller branches. These are bronchioles. Fine. And these bronchioles again divide, let's say here from here, these divide into lobular bronchioles, and these lobular bronchioles divide into terminal bronchioles, fine. And these terminal bronchioles divide into the respiratory bronchioles first. Respiratory bronchioles. Try to understand. And these respiratory bronchioles again into fine branches, very small branches, and this is from here, that is the arterial, let's say it is arterial duct, and then it becomes expanded, right? So it becomes expanded, let's say like this. So it becomes expanded. This is atrium here, and then finally this atrium opens into the miniature lungs, and this is just like the bunch of grapes. So this is the alveolar sac, or alveolus. Singular is alveolus, plural is alveoli. So this is the lung alveoli where the actual gas exchange takes place. So this is how this division and redivision of the primary, secondary, tertiary bronchi occurs. This is the actual structure where the exchange of gases takes place, because it's having a lot of surface area for this, right? So, but for the exchange of gases, that is oxygen and carbon dioxide at this surface, which now constitutes the respiratory surface, this constitutes the respiratory surface. Here the oxygen is diffusing, that has come from the outside environment, right, via the respiratory tract, and finally comes here in the lung alveoli. From here it diffuses into the blood. So when it diffuses in the blood, let's say here is oxygen that will diffuse into the blood. So in order to diffuse into the blood, this lung alveoli or this lung alveolus must be supplied by the a lot of blood capillaries. So yes, this is the physiological importance of these lung alveoli. Yeah, these lung alveoli are supplied by many blood capillaries, fine blood capillaries. So this is the red color. I don't know whether you can see it or not, whether you can watch it. So this is actually the blood capillaries outside, fine blood capillaries outside the lung alveoli. So once there is exchange of gases, that exchange takes place between the lung alveoli and the blood outside, and blood is present in the capillaries that are supplying the lung alveoli. There is an intimate contact between the lung alveoli and the blood capillaries outside, right? And the type of epithelium, that's very, very important here. The type of epithelium that is lining these lung alveoli is not pseudostratified epithelium as we have seen in the trachea or other parts of the respiratory tract. The type of epithelium, which is the most important thing of the respiratory membrane, we will discuss, we will explain the actual, barriers and actual structures of the respiratory membrane in another topic where we discuss the exchange of gases. So here you have to understand this lung alveoli, which is supplied by the fine blood capillaries outside, right? But this lung alveoli it is lined by an epithelium. It is lined by an epithelium, and that epithelium is known as simple squamous epithelium. So here this simple squamous epithelium is very, very important for the exchange of gases. It constitutes the part of the respiratory membrane, right, which is the membrane important, significant for the exchange of gases, oxygen into the blood and carbon dioxide into the lung alveoli, right? So but if we take a section from here, it's very difficult to see these two things separated from each other, that is the blood capillaries and the lung alveoli, because there is very intimate contact between the squamous epithelium of the lung alveoli and the blood capillaries outside, the endothelium of the blood capillaries outside. So this intimate contact between the two is responsible for the fast, effective exchange of gases between the lung alveoli and the blood, right? Now, but there is one more thing that is very, very important for the lung alveoli, which prevents these lung alveoli from collapsing. These lung alveoli generally do not collapse once there is birth of an individual, birth of a baby. The lungs alveoli gets expanded and they work themselves, right, for the exchange of gases. And these lung alveoli are prevented from the collapsing, right? There is a fluid, I should say, there is a type of lipid. There is a type of lipid which is responsible for reducing the surface tension, which decreases the surface tension here and prevents the collapsing of these lung alveoli. There is a film of a substance. There is a film of a substance in the lung alveoli preventing it from the collapsing, that is known as lecithin. This is a type of phospholipid, lecithin. Actually, biochemically, it is a phospholipid, and this phospholipid is very, very important. It is known as surfactant on the basis of its function, right? It's known as surfactant, and this surfactant is very, very important in the lung alveoli, preventing the lung alveoli from the collapsing at the time of inspiration or expiration, whether it is forcible or whether it is normal, right? So this film of lecithin is very, very important for these lung alveoli. And here I would like to mention a clinical correlation that's very, very important. In some infants, when they are born, when there is birth of a neonate, an infant, right? So their lung alveoli must expand for the respiration that they have to carry out themselves from now onwards, right? In the womb of the mother, the oxygen is obtained from the placenta as well. But when there is birth of the baby, they have to perform this function themselves now, right? So the lung alveoli should be very efficient for the exchange of gases, and the babies, infants, they have more metabolic rate than the adults, and they need a lot of oxygen, more oxygen. So there should be no collapsing of these lung alveoli after the birth. But sometimes there is a very unfortunate thing that these lung alveoli are without this surfactant. These lung alveoli have less or negligible or absence of this surfactant, that is lecithin, and there is a condition in the infants, and many a times the infants die because of the breathlessness, because of the deprivation of oxygen, right? Because the lung alveoli get collapsed. The condition is known as infant distress syndrome. Infant distress syndrome, IDS, infant distress syndrome. This infant distress syndrome is because of the lack of this lecithin, which is the film of phospholipid present in the lung alveoli and prevent the lung alveoli from the collapsing, right? So this is the structure of the lungs, that is external structure, where we have seen the pleura, pleural membranes, mediastinum, and we have also come across the various structures, right, which are protecting the lungs from the outside, that is thoracic cavity, ribs, and all that. Now, so far as internal structure is concerned, we have understood now, hope so, that these primary bronchi which enter into the two lungs, they divide, redivide, and finally they form the bronchioles, and bronchioles into many branches like these lobular bronchioles, terminal bronchioles, respiratory bronchioles, finally the atrium, and then finally into the lung alveoli, right? So the actual exchange of gases, that is the diffusion of oxygen into the blood and diffusion of carbon dioxide into the lung alveoli for expiration, that occurs in these miniature lungs called alveolar sacs or lung alveoli. And it has been estimated that in both the lungs, human lungs, there is different data in different books, but I will give you the both, that it is estimated that there are approximately 300 to 500 million lung alveoli in human lungs, and which have provided a lot of surface area. These 3 to 500 million lung alveoli have provided a lot of surface area. Surface area for what? Surface area for the adequate exchange of gases, that's oxygen and carbon dioxide, which is very, very vital, which is very, very important for the survival of the individual, right? So this is all about the lungs, guys. This is the second part of the respiratory system. So in these two lectures, we have concluded the anatomy of respiratory system, human respiratory system. In the upcoming lecture, we will discuss the physiological aspects of the respiration, and so far as our syllabus is concerned, we are supposed to go through the exchange of gases, how this exchange of gases takes place. We have to understand some diffusion processes and the partial pressure of gases, and we will also discuss a very, very important topic, upcoming topic, that is the transport of gases by the blood. When there is exchange, oxygen diffuses into the blood, right? But for the exchange of carbon dioxide with the external environment, that is also carried by the blood. So these finally these two gases, that's oxygen and carbon dioxide, these are transported by the blood. This is one of the important function of the blood, that both these gases are transported by the blood for the exchange, right? So we have to discuss this very important point, that is transport of gases by blood. How and in what form the blood transports these two types of gases, that is oxygen and carbon dioxide, right? So for that you need to watch the upcoming videos, upcoming lectures, right? And you will get the maximum benefit out of it. Thank you for watching, thank you for listening. God bless you.